We start out every month. Those of you who are new, we meet once a month, and so it's welcome to the Grandparents Huddle. It's really good to have you. And I'll explain more of what we're trying to do this year in a minute, but we always have started with kind of a grandparent hat from my wife Karen. So Karen, if you'll come up.
So this is May, and I thought I'd take a different track this month because it's Mother's Day. And Mother's Day is one of those kind of holidays that has a lot of different mixed emotions. I was looking for cards just last week for my daughters and daughter-in-law, and it almost took my breath away to remember I don't have a mom anymore. And so it's just one of those days. And then I'm sure there are people in this room that have moms that aren't well. And so I almost just want to ask you to just notice that and take a moment and say a prayer of thanks for the mom that you had, the mom that you have, and then be the mom that you want to be, maybe that you wish you had had. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm assuming all of us have daughters or daughters-in-law because we're grandparents. So let's think about that for a minute. We may have an idea of what we wanted grandparenting to look like, and it might not look like that. And that's okay too. What we have is what we have. And so let's look at those daughters and daughters-in-law and think of how we can support and honor and encourage them. A couple years ago, I think I thought it'd be fun. I would give them a card, and I thought it'd be fun to do a little something extra. And I'm going to give you some ideas. The only thing about doing something extra is you have to keep doing it, or you're going to hurt their feelings. So tread carefully in this. I would suggest, honoring their role. Hey, here's a Starbucks card if you want to go out for a time. I think last year I might have given them a manicure. Maybe just watch the kids while they go out. Think creatively of how you can communicate. I appreciate you, I see you, and I want to help you. And then I have a couple little tips on just navigating that relationship. One is to be available and maybe listen between the lines. So in other words, mostly with my daughters, if I hear them say, oh, I'm so exhausted, or oh, I've been driving the kids all, that might be my opportunity to say, hey, how can I help? Can I pick up somebody? Can I do this? With the caution of, this is what I would do. We want to listen and hear, but we don't necessarily want to infuse how we would do it better or different, right? We want to respect the parenting that they have. So listen, but don't solve. Set apart time, and this, you do better with this than I do. Set apart time to just be with them. So setting up a time just to be with my daughters or just to be with Jeremy. Take some planning, but that honors them in that relationship as well. Cheer them on in front of each other, their kids, or the spouse. So in other words, you go over there for dinner and there's a great meal or a great dessert. That was so delicious. Thank you for including us. Or the house looks so clean, not condescending, but just complimenting what you can. Looking for positives, complimenting what you can. And always looking for ways to encourage. And also, I would say finally, asking specifically if there's something that you can pray about for them. Well, we've talked about how to pray for the kids, but how can we pray for you as an individual? Because I think every mother in here knows we just kind of blend in with all the needs of the house, and sometimes you don't feel as seen as the others. So So those are my tips for today.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Ken. All right, now, for those of you who are new, we want to accomplish kind of 3 things this year. We talked about wanting to be a prepared grandparent and praying grandparent, so you all have cards that will give you kind of direction on how to pray for your grandparents this coming month. And then a connected grandparent, that's why we are gathered around in tables. You'll have a time just to talk at the end around your table. The prepared grandparent, and that's why this sign is up here. I had a young couple come up to me who happened to walk through the gym, and they're a little bit concerned about what are you teaching grandparents? So this is, I picked this sign. It's in several yards on the walk that I take every morning. And it's a kind of a declaration of some of the things really that your grandkids are going to challenge their faith. So each month we're taking one of those statements and just trying to talk it through, try to give you maybe some help as you talk to your grandkids. If you see a sign like this, so you can know kind of at least some direction to give grandparents or grandkids. And today is the saying, love is love. Love is love. And of course, that is really about gay marriage for the most part. And what the statement is saying, it's really interesting because you have to kind of think it through. I remember when my youngest daughter was living in Houston. You know, she has grown up in the church, and she's back, she's in this church, she's very involved. But when she was down in Houston as a single woman, all her friends, I remember her calling me a couple times and just saying, tell me again why gay marriage is wrong, because it just made so much sense, and all of her friends were saying, hey, it's just another relationship. So when somebody says love is love, well, I struggle with the order to put these. Let me start with this. With your grandkids, at any time in your grandkids' life, you can ask this question. But whenever somebody talks to me about homosexuality, they say, is it wrong for somebody to be gay? I always start the same way. I always say, I'll answer that question if you answer a question that I have. And actually, I'll have 2 questions. And the first question is anything wrong? That's it. Is anything wrong? And of course, the person you're talking to will say yes, if they're honest. If there's no way they'll say no, because they're challenging you with they think it's wrong to think that gay marriage is wrong. So once you say, is anything wrong? Then they say yes. Then the next question is, who decides? How do you decide what's right and wrong? And that always pushes somebody into a philosophical corner, whether they realize it or not, because there are only a few answers for that. One is that everyone decides on their own what's right and wrong. Let your conscience be your guide, like Jiminy Cricket. The problem, of course, is that Jeffrey Dahmer, who lived in this area, might have been following his own conscience. When you say follow your own conscience, I remember that this is Ravi Zacharias, who now lives a little bit in infamy, is an infamy. But he would say, when he was on an airplane, somebody talked to him about what was saying everybody just gets to decide. He said, some people teach that you should love your neighbor, some people teach you should eat your neighbors. Who would you rather have as a neighbor? Right? So the whole idea that everyone gets to decide, we know that's not true. All right? So another one is that culture, prevailing culture gets to decide. And of course, if that's true, then slavery would have continued, because for a while actually throughout human history, and it's still true today, that slavery in some cultures is considered fine. I remember reading a biography of William Wilberforce, who was the Englishman who actually spent his life trying to make the slave trade in Great Britain illegal. He did it because he was a Christian, but the biography said the greatest accomplishment William Wilberforce ever had is that he convinced the world that slavery was wrong. Because no one in the history of the world had ever thought that slavery was morally wrong, which is wild now, right? But slavery at one point was legal in the United States, and the question is, what made that illegal? Who decided? And that was actually decided by Christians. Another example for right and wrong is that in Germany in World War II, it was not against the law to kill Jews. So the Holocaust, they didn't break any laws, and the Nuremberg trials of war criminals, what they did was they appealed to the law of God. And they said what you did was against the law of God, and you knew that deep down. So, anyway. So once you ask them, okay, and I would start that when the kids are very small, who decides what's right and wrong? Because I would get it in their heads that God decides what's right and wrong. So who decides whether gay marriage is right or wrong? Or how do you, whether sex in any situation is right or wrong? Okay, that's the question. As kids get older, if you're talking to your own children. And sex in, virtually everyone, qualify this, almost everyone, believes that sex in certain relationships is wrong, right? And I say virtually everyone because there's a guy named Peter Singer who is a bioethicist at one point, and he's a professor emeritus at Princeton University, and at one time was considered the foremost ethicist in the United States. And Peter Singer, if you know anything about him, is somebody who is, once you cut the string and you say that God is not the one who decides what's right and wrong, then everything's really up for grabs. And so what Peter Singer says is that his rule of thumb is that if it doesn't hurt somebody, which is what some people say. So Peter Singer always pushes the envelope. Somebody asked him whether it was right or wrong for a human being to have sex with a man. Professor at Princeton, foremost ethicist in the United States, said, not with a cow or a goat or a sheep, because you can't tell them maybe they enjoy it, probably with a chicken, because you might kill it. That was his answer. Also, Peter Singer, at one point, wrote a paper that rape was not wrong because it was just biology. It was like the strongest lion deciding to have sex in order to procreate. And then that hit such a firestorm that he withdrew the paper and said it was a mistake. So once you cut the string as far as what's right and wrong, then things are up for grabs. So if you have kids or grandkids that are starting to struggle with sexuality, I would start there. What makes something right or wrong? Right? I would have that discussion. When somebody says love is love, no one really believes that because there are different ways to use the English word love. For me to say that I love pizza and I love my wife Karen, everybody knows that I mean two different things. That love, and if I say I love my children, I love my friend, and I love my wife, those have different types of connotations to them too. Right? The Greeks were more precise. The Greek language is a more precise language. There are 4 words for love. in the Greek language, and I put those on your paper. Let me just go through those, and then we'll talk about it. The first is, I think, let's see which one I did list out first. Phileo, which is friendship love. Super undervalued, by the way. Friendship love in the Greek language is a very, very strong love, a very deep affection. It is a love that emanates from the heart more than the mind. And I'll explain that as I get to agape, which is the opposite. It is more from your mind than your heart, because agape is a choice. But phileo is one of those things that we have lost in our culture. If you're watching a movie and you see particularly two women forming a very, very strong, deep friendship, in our culture now, that almost always turns the corner into a sexual relationship. When people who, in our culture, read the Bible, they read about Jonathan and David, then they think, oh, they have a sexual relationship. But that's because we undervalue phileo. Phileo is if you have a really good marriage, you not only have like the other loves, you also, like when somebody says, I'm married my best friend, or that's a phileo kind of love. The second kind of love is storge, and that's familial love. It's the way a parent loves a child, and the way a child loves their parents. The third kind of love is agape, which is the kind of love that is spoken of in the New Testament as the kind of love that God has for us. Although when Jesus says, I no longer call you disciples, I call you my friends, he is saying something very strong there about phileo. Agape, though, is a choice, is a love of choice. It's a sacrificial love. So if someone, like the soldier is in a battle and another soldier is wounded, it's that sense of duty, a willingness to sacrifice, that saying, I will go and get that person, bring them back. Right? That's agape. And then finally, eros, which is the last kind of love, that is a sexual love. That's where we get the word erotic. Now, if you think about each one of those as a chemical, and you add those to each other, you can add certain of those to each other. You can add storge and phileo, where you can, as your children grow up, you can end up with a relationship where your son becomes somebody that you would call a friend, and they would think of you as a friend. So you will still maintain one over the other. That's one of those things. Eros is one of those chemicals that it radically changes any other relationship. Right? That's why when you have a movie that's like Friends with Benefits, that's adding eros to a friendship. Even in the comedy series Seinfeld, there was a time when Jerry and Elaine had sex and they realized it changed the relationship so radically that they either had to quit being, for a while they were deciding whether they were going to get married or quit being friends because it couldn't fit. You add sex to almost to like when somebody says love is love, what they're saying is sex is the same regardless of what relationship you have. And that's just not true. You can have a great relationship with your child and you can love them with a very strong affection. You add sex to that relationship and you know that it is completely and radically changed and destroyed. Right? So when somebody says love is love, I'll be going, well, back up. Let's talk about what you just said and what that means. So are you saying this about eros in particular, because that's what they're usually talking about? All right. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. I wanted to go into. Okay. One of the things that people have decided with sexuality in particular, and this is why they will. Let me back up. In 2016, our Supreme Court of the United States made a ruling on a case between Obergefell and Hodges that legalized and gave the right for people of the same sex to marry. First time in human history that the definition of marriage was changed. Okay, let that sink in. First time in any culture in the history of the world that a culture decided to change the definition of marriage. The reason is because marriage had a particular purpose, according to the Bible. The whole idea of sex, by the way, between a man and a woman is connected to procreation. Now, there are two things that happen with sex, and you probably know this. One is you can have sex for procreation, or that, and then you can have sex for pleasure. There's a book that I brought with me. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman. It starts out with the idea that it starts out with like a sentence that says, "I'm a woman trapped in a man's body," and the author starts with, how did that sentence ever end up making sense to the majority of the population? And he goes through a whole history of how we got where we have gotten, how we got to 2016. One of the ways that it happened is he goes all the way back to when birth control was introduced, particularly the pill, in the late 1950s, early 1960s. Tell me what the 1960s were known for. Right? The sex revolution. What happened is we separated sex from procreation, which the Bible never does. In Genesis, when God says, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh," right after that, the command is given to Adam and Eve to populate the earth, right? Flourish. So once we separated sex from procreation, that meant that marriage was no longer for the benefit of children. And that's why 2016, but this, we separated sex from procreation. Then with in vitro, and whatever you think of in vitro, one of the things that he says in his book is that then we separate procreation from sex, from anything to do with another person. Why? Because whenever I read that two men or two women have a baby, I always think, no. That's one thing that they can't do without the help of the opposite sex in one way or another. Because, and this is my point, when somebody says love is love, the other question, I start with the question, is there anything wrong, and what makes something wrong? The other question is, who gets to decide the use of something? Like I've said over and over again, but I'm not a handyman at all. Which means I also don't have any tools to speak of, right? Which means that when I do try to be a handyman, I'm consistently using the wrong tools, so I have no danger of ever becoming a handy helper. But if I take, like I have an old drill, and if I take that drill and I use it like a hammer, it's going to destroy the drill, and it also will not accomplish what I want it to accomplish. If God created sex in such a way that it's the only way to recreate, to create another human being, that is the way. God didn't have to do that, right? He could have made us like amoebas, or he separated. There's a lot of different things that God could do. Instead, he said, what I'm going to make is male and female. And the only way to create another human being is for the male and female to come together, right? And then that family unit, like a husband and a wife, will make a covenant to each other so that will keep a stable environment for the children to grow up in. And every bit of research you can find in sociology will say that the very best environment for children to grow up in is with a father and a mother. They're just now starting to have the first research about children growing up with same-sex parents, and it's not even close to to the health of children who are raised by a mother and a father. Just so you know. All right. So those are the things that I would be talking about with the kids. The thing that you also have to hit when somebody says love is love, especially if you have a grandchild that begins to struggle with their sexuality. I would always try to help them separate identity and attraction. There's a difference. When somebody says, I'm gay, what they're saying is, this is now my identity. And that is not true. You are more than your sexuality. I have never introduced myself by saying, I'm Joe, I'm a heterosexual. Right? That's what you want kids to start to think, at least, and they may be same-sex attracted. I would keep it there. I would just say, oh no, you're not gay. You're same-sex attracted. Right? That's different. Because that's something that you can decide, you know what, I'm same-sex attracted, but this is the way I'm going to deal with my same-sex attraction. I'm opposite-sex attracted. Right? That's true about me. Now, God says there are certain righteous and unrighteous ways to deal with my opposite-sex attraction. Same thing with same-sex attraction. So I would get them to separate identity from same-sex attraction, what they're attracted to. The other thing is that intimacy is different than sex. Okay, that's another big one. Intimacy is different than sex. One of the things that I think the church struggles with is talking. We talk so much about marriage, we don't talk about what it's like to be single. We don't take care of single people very well. As far as connecting them, a human being cannot live without intimacy. Every human being needs to know and to be known, to love, to be loved. Right? That's true. That's why solitary confinement is one of the worst punishments for a human being. You have to have intimacy. You don't have to have sex. There are plenty of married people that, for one reason or another, continue to have intimacy, but are not able to have sex anymore. Right? So I would separate that, because I know that there are people that's what they say. They say, why would God not allow me to have what other people have? Well, there's a lot of stuff that other people have that you don't have, right? But what God has not robbed you, He's not said you cannot have something that you desperately need. He said you can have intimacy. That's part of phileo. That's part of what the church is supposed to be. But sex with another person of the same sex is adding a chemical to a relationship that, whether you realize it or not, it damages you and damages that relationship. Oh, that's the other thing. Last thing, too, is that people say, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. And the question there is, how do you know? don't even know. What, sex is such a weird thing, right? And if you've ever tried to, and if you can remember when you first had like a sex talk with, I remember thinking I was just going to hit it head on. You know, my son Jerry was like 10. I'm just thinking, oh, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm just going to say it. And even when I said it, I was going, this is so weird, right? Just, it is such and it's a thing that is so powerful. And our culture still realizes that it's so powerful because assault is different than sexual assault. It's treated differently. Sexual assault is a much more damaging thing than assault. We know that. We know that. But then to say, oh, well, love, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, I just want to say you have no idea about the mystery of that connection between people. You have no idea. Only God knows. And God says, this is the way I created this great gift, to be enjoyed, and it's between a man and a woman. And from the beginning, it's been so. All right? So, all right. That's love is love. I don't know what our next one is. I'll look and then tell you before we end. But now you can have a discussion around your table and give you some stuff to think about. I'll be up here if you have any questions. Right, thanks.